Good evening, and welcome back to the Sleepy Historian. I'm glad you're here, settling in, perhaps letting the noise of the day fade a little, because tonight we are not chasing battles, emperors, or loud moments of history. Tonight, we are listening for something quieter, something hidden beneath stone. When most people think of the Colosseum, they imagine noise, crowds, roaring animals, and clashing steel. They picture sunlight flooding an open arena, thousands of eyes fixed on the spectacle below. But the Colosseum was never only what could be seen. In fact, the most remarkable parts of it were carefully tucked away, out of sight, working silently while the audience looked elsewhere. This video is about those unseen spaces, about engineering that did not demand attention, but patiently waited beneath the sand, about systems designed not to impress at first glance, but to endure, to move, to coordinate, and to quietly hold together one of the largest public buildings the ancient world ever knew. As we begin, there is no need to rush. Imagine the stone cooling after sunset, the crowds long gone, the arena floor resting in silence. The Colosseum, at night, feels less like a monument and more like a sleeping machine, still holding its secrets, breathing slowly through arches and corridors. So take a breath, get comfortable, and let's begin our gentle walk around the outer shell of the Colosseum, where the story starts not with noise, but with stone. The Colosseum rises from the center of Rome with an almost effortless confidence, as if it has always been there and always intended to stay. From a distance, it looks solid, complete, and straightforward, a massive ring of stone stacked carefully toward the sky. Most visitors stop here, admiring the arches, the rhythm of the columns, the sense that this structure exists simply to be looked at. And in a way, that is exactly what the Romans wanted. The outer shell of the Colosseum was designed to speak clearly, even loudly, without saying too much. Its repeating arches created a sense of order and strength, while the layers of columns, Doric at the bottom, Ionic in the middle, Corinthian at the top, suggested balance rather than excess. To the Roman eye, this was a familiar language of architecture, calm, reassuring, and disciplined. Nothing about the exterior hinted at confusion or chaos. It promised stability, control, and permanence. Yet this stone shell was never meant to carry the full burden of the building. That is one of the Colosseum's quiet tricks. While it appears to be the main support, much of the real work happens deeper inside. The exterior walls act more like a carefully tailored garment, wrapping around a hidden framework that does the actual lifting. This separation between appearance and function allowed Roman engineers to build larger, faster, and more flexibly than if every wall had to bear heavy loads. Walking around the Colosseum, you might notice the many entrances, evenly spaced and nearly identical. There are dozens of them, each opening into darkness beyond the bright Roman sun. These entrances were not decorative choices. They were practical, deliberate solutions to a very real problem. Tens of thousands of people needed to enter and leave quickly, calmly, and without confusion. The stone shell, with its rhythm of arches, was already quietly guiding human movement, long before anyone reached their seat. What makes this even more remarkable is how little instruction was needed. No signs, no guards shouting orders, no complex directions carved into stone. The building itself did the explaining. Arches invited people forward, corridors narrowed and widened naturally. Stairways rose gently where they were needed. Architecture became a silent guide, shaping behavior without raising its voice. At night, when the crowds were gone, the Colosseum's exterior took on a different role. Without noise or movement, it became a protective layer, shielding the delicate systems inside from weather, wind, and time. Rain struck the outer stone first. Heat met the facade before reaching the inner structure. Even damage was absorbed slowly, sacrificing surface elements so the core could remain intact. This was not accidental. Roman builders understood that a building meant to last centuries needed layers, not just strength. The stone itself tells part of the story. Large blocks of travertine were fitted together with remarkable precision, held not only by mortar, but by metal clamps that locked pieces into place. Over time, many of these clamps were removed or stolen, leaving scars that still mark the surface today. These empty slots remind us that the Colosseum was never frozen in one moment. It was lived in, reused, altered, and slowly transformed, yet the overall structure endured. What feels especially gentle about the Colosseum's design is that it never insists on being understood. You can walk past it without knowing any of this, and it will not protest. It does not demand admiration for its engineering. It simply stands, doing what it was designed to do, holding space, containing memory, and quietly supporting the world that once moved inside it. As you circle the building, the repetition of arches becomes almost hypnotic. One opening follows another, each similar, each slightly different depending on light and shadow. It is easy to imagine ancient Romans moving through these spaces, their conversations blending into a low hum, their footsteps echoing briefly before being absorbed by stone. The exterior shell was the first stage of the Colosseum's performance, not of spectacle, but of control. And yet, for all its calm confidence, this outer layer is only the beginning. It is a promise rather than an explanation. The true complexity lies deeper, below the sand, below the seats, in places the audience was never meant to see. The Colosseum's most important work happened quietly, away from applause, in spaces designed for precision rather than beauty. As the night settles and the stone cools, the shell seems almost to relax, as if it knows its role is done for now. It has stood long enough to prove its point. Tomorrow, or in another century, people will come again, look up, and assume they understand it. But for now, it rests, guarding the hidden world beneath, waiting patiently for us to step inside. If the outer shell of the Colosseum was meant to be seen, then everything beneath it was designed to be forgotten, and that forgetting was intentional. The Romans understood something very subtle about spectacle. The illusion only works when the machinery stays hidden. So beneath the arena floor, below the sand that absorbed blood and footsteps alike, they built an entirely different world, one that functioned quietly while the crowd looked elsewhere. This underground space is known today as the Hypogeum, but to imagine it merely as a basement would be a mistake. It was more like a dense, organized city compressed beneath the arena, a network of corridors, chambers, ramps, and platforms arranged with careful logic. Walking through it would have felt nothing like standing in the sunlit stands above. Here, light was scarce, air moved differently, and sound behaved in strange ways, echoing briefly before vanishing into stone. The Hypogeum was not part of the original design. It was added later when Roman engineers realized that controlling what happened below the arena was just as important as what happened above it. This decision transformed the Colosseum from a simple performance space into something closer to a machine, one that could prepare, store, and release elements of a show with precision. Animals, performers, props, and scenery all pass through this hidden layer before ever reaching the eyes of the audience. What makes the Hypogeum especially fascinating is how purposeful its darkness was. These corridors were not meant to confuse, but to focus. Each passage led somewhere specific. Each room had a role. Cages held animals in quiet tension, storage areas kept scenery ready, and narrow walkways guided workers along routes they likely memorized by heart. There was no room here for wandering. Everything moved with intention. Sound in the Hypogeum would have been muted but constant. The low shuffle of feet, the creak of wooden structures, the soft clink of metal fittings, and the breathing of animals waiting in the dark. Above, the audience might have been cheering, but below, the mood was entirely different. It was a place of concentration, routine, and careful timing. A single mistake could disrupt the illusion unfolding overhead. What is remarkable is how efficiently this underground world fit beneath the arena. Space was limited, yet nothing feels accidental. The Romans layered functions vertically and horizontally, stacking utility in a way that feels surprisingly modern. They understood that controlling movement below would allow them to choreograph surprise above. When an animal appeared suddenly in the arena, it was because dozens of quiet actions had aligned perfectly beneath the sand. The Hypogeum also reveals a softer truth about Roman engineering. Despite its reputation for grandeur and power, Much of it depended on human coordination rather than brute force. There were no engines here, no hidden magic. Everything relied on people knowing their place, their timing, and their task. The underground was not impressive because it was overwhelming, but because it was orderly. Even the materials used below reflected this mindset. Wood was common, not stone, because it was easier to modify, replace, and repair. Platforms could be adjusted, corridors reshaped, and mechanisms reworked without disturbing the massive structure above. This flexibility allowed the hypogeum to evolve over time, adapting to new types of performances and changing needs. The Colosseum was not static, it learned. Water management was another quiet concern beneath the arena. Rainwater, groundwater, and waste all had to be guided away carefully. Channels and drains were built into the hypogeum to keep the space usable, even during storms. Without this attention to detail, the underground world would have flooded, turning precision into chaos. Instead, it remained functional, dry enough to support the complex choreography unfolding within it. Standing in the hypogeum today, what strikes many visitors is not its size, but its intimacy. The ceilings are low in places, the corridors narrow, the stone close at hand. It feels human-scaled, designed for workers rather than crowds. This was not a place for glory. It was a place for preparation. The Colosseum depended on this hidden layer, yet never acknowledged it publicly. At night, when the arena above fell silent, the hypogeum would have been the last place to rest. Workers extinguished lamps, checked gates, secured animals, and left quietly through side passages. The underground did not celebrate. It simply waited. The next performance would come, and the machinery would wake again. There is something deeply calming about this unseen world. It reminds us that even the loudest moments in history are supported by quiet systems. The hypogeum did not demand attention, yet without it, the Colosseum would have been little more than an empty shell. Its power lay in restraint, in staying hidden, in doing its work without applause. As we move on, deeper into the Colosseum story, we will begin to see how this underground world connected upward, how its careful order translated into sudden motion and surprise above the sand. But for now, it is enough to linger here, in the cool darkness beneath the arena, where history whispers rather than shouts, and where the real work of spectacle quietly began. Above the hypogeum, the arena floor looked simple, a flat surface of sand, pale and unassuming, stretching across the center of the Colosseum like a calm lake. To the audience, it appeared solid and permanent, a place where events simply happened. But this surface was a lie, or perhaps a carefully told story. Beneath that sand was a system designed to move, to open, and to surprise, often without warning. The arena floor was not made of stone. It was built from layers of wood, arranged carefully to support weight while remaining light enough to be lifted, lowered, and replaced. This choice was deliberate. Stone would have been too heavy, too final. Wood allowed flexibility, and flexibility was the heart of Roman spectacle. The floor was less a boundary and more a curtain, separating the visible world above from the machinery below. Hidden within this wooden plane were openings, carefully disguised and precisely positioned. At the right moment, a section of floor could part, and something unexpected would rise from beneath. An animal, a performer, a piece of scenery, all emerging as if summoned by the arena itself. To the crowd, it must have felt like magic. To those below, it was the result of careful timing and practiced coordination. The lifting devices used beneath the arena were simple in principle, but elegant in execution. Vertical shafts lined the hypogeum, each housing a platform connected to ropes and pulleys. These ropes were made from natural fibers, twisted tightly for strength, and guided through wooden frames to distribute weight evenly. There were no sudden jerks, no violent motion. Everything moved with controlled slowness, powered by human hands pulling in unison. What makes this system remarkable is not its complexity, but its reliability. These lifts were used repeatedly, sometimes dozens of times in a single day. They had to work smoothly, silently, enough to avoid drawing attention before the reveal, and safely enough to prevent disaster. A stuck platform or a snapped rope would not merely disrupt a show, it could injure or kill those involved. Precision was not optional. The coordination required for these lifts bordered on choreography. Workers below received cues, likely through sound or timing signals, and began pulling at just the right moment. Above, the sand shifted slightly, perhaps unnoticed, before giving way to motion. The audience never saw the preparation. They only saw the result, the sudden appearance that made the arena feel alive. There is something quietly humorous in imagining this moment from both perspectives. Above, gasps and cheers. Below, strained muscles, focused faces, and the soft rhythm of coordinated effort. The drama was divided neatly by a few planks of wood. One world performed, the other labored. Over time, the Romans refined this system. The number of lifts increased, their placement became more strategic, and their operation more efficient. The hypogeum transformed into a vertical stage, capable of delivering surprise from almost any point beneath the arena. This allowed performances to feel unpredictable, even when rehearsed. The illusion of chaos depended on hidden order. The wooden floor itself required constant maintenance. Sand absorbed moisture, blood, and debris, and beneath it, the wood needed protection.
Sections were removed and replaced regularly, adjusted as the underground systems evolved. This meant the arena was never truly finished. It was always in a state of becoming, adapting to new demands and new ideas. Sound played a subtle role in this illusion. The thick layers of sand muffled the noises below, turning the creaks of wood and the pull of ropes into vague murmurs, easily mistaken for the shifting of the crowd. The Romans understood acoustics well enough to know that silence is rarely absolute and that the right kind of noise can disappear into the background. Light, too, was carefully managed. While the arena above was flooded with daylight, the hypogem remained dim. When a lift rose, it carried its cargo from shadow into brightness in a single moment. This contrast amplified the sense of drama, making each appearance feel more sudden, more alive. The arena did not simply reveal objects, it transformed them. From a modern perspective, it is tempting to call this engineering clever or advanced, but those words miss something important. What the Romans achieved here was not technological dominance, but theatrical understanding. They knew that people respond not just to what they see, but to how and when they see it. The floor opening beneath their feet played on a deep instinct, the thrill of the unexpected. As the day wore on and performances continued, the floor opened and closed again and again, never revealing its secrets. Each time, the sand smoothed over the seams, erasing the evidence. The arena returned to calm, as if nothing had happened. This ability to reset, to hide complexity beneath simplicity, is one of the Colosseum's quietest triumphs. And so, while the audience focused on the action before them, the true movement of the Colosseum flowed vertically between darkness and light, effort and illusion. The floor was not just a surface, it was a threshold, a place where hidden labor became visible spectacle, and where history learned how to surprise without ever explaining itself. As we continue, we will follow that movement upward, beyond the floor, and into the structure that held thousands of watching eyes, exploring how the Colosseum guided people just as carefully as it guided machines. But for now, it is enough to imagine that wooden floor, resting quietly in the sun, concealing a world always ready to rise. If the arena floor was a carefully rehearsed illusion, then the crowd above it was part of the design as well. Long before anyone sat down to watch, the Colosseum had already decided where they would go, how they would move, and how they would leave. This was not chaos contained within stone, but movement guided so gently that it rarely felt like control at all. From the outside, the Colosseum appeared monumental and heavy, a ring of stone rising confidently from the Roman ground. But step closer, and the structure begins to feel strangely welcoming. Dozens of entrances open along its curve, evenly spaced like polite invitations. These arches were not decorative flourishes, they were carefully calculated gateways, each designed to swallow part of the crowd and guide it inward without friction. The Romans understood something fundamental about human behavior. People dislike waiting, dislike confusion, and dislike feeling trapped. So the Colosseum was built to make crowds feel as though they were flowing naturally, even when tens of thousands arrived at once. Each entrance led into a corridor, and each corridor led onward, branching and curving like a stone river system. Inside, the air cooled, sound softened. The roar of the city faded and was replaced by the echo of footsteps and distant voices. These passageways were not wide halls meant for gathering. They were transitional spaces encouraging steady movement forward. No one lingered long enough to block the flow. The architecture gently insisted that you keep going. Stairs rose and fell at calculated angles, guiding spectators toward their assigned levels. The climb was never abrupt, never exhausting. Instead, it unfolded gradually, giving the body time to adjust, the mind time to anticipate. Even the darkness was intentional. Dim corridors made the eventual arrival at the seating area feel brighter, more open, almost theatrical. Seating itself followed a strict hierarchy, but the design softened its severity. Social rank determined where you sat, yet the routes leading to each section were efficient and discreet. People of different classes rarely crossed paths once inside. This was not accidental. The building separated the crowd invisibly, reducing tension and maintaining order without the need for constant enforcement. What is most remarkable is how quickly the Colosseum could empty. At the end of an event, thousands stood and left almost simultaneously. And yet, the building did not choke or resist. The same corridors that welcomed people in now guided them out, reversing the flow with practiced ease. Modern observers often marvel at this efficiency, but the Romans would have seen it as simple, good planning. These passageways, later called vomitoria, are often misunderstood. They were not places of excess or indulgence, but channels of release. Their purpose was to expel crowds smoothly, returning them to the city without panic or congestion. The name itself comes from the idea of rapid discharge, not disorder. The building breathed people in and out with calm regularity. Above the corridors, within the structure's thick walls, were hidden staircases and service routes. These allowed workers, guards, and performers to move unseen, ensuring that the visible crowd experience remained uninterrupted. Once again, the pattern repeats. What mattered most was not what people noticed, but what they did not. Even the angles of the seating played a role. Rows rose steeply enough to ensure clear sightlines, yet not so steep that they felt precarious. The design balanced visibility with comfort, excitement with safety. From almost anywhere, the arena was visible, framed perfectly by stone and sky. The crowd was held physically and emotionally in just the right position. Sound traveled carefully through this space. Cheers rolled downward, magnified by the curve of the seating, while individual shouts blended into a collective voice. No single person dominated the noise. The building shaped the sound into something larger, more unified. The crowd did not merely watch together, they sounded together. There is a quiet irony here. While the Colosseum is often remembered for spectacle and violence, much of its engineering was devoted to preventing disorder. The building anticipated human impulses and gently redirected them. It offered clarity where there might have been confusion and flow where there might have been panic. Imagine sitting there as the event begins. You have arrived without struggle, found your place without argument, and settled into stone that seems to cradle rather than confine. The arena below waits, calm for now. Around you, thousands breathe, shift, and murmur. all guided by a structure that has already done its work. By the time the first movement appears on the sand, the building has already performed its most complex feat. It has transformed a city into an audience without ever announcing how it did so. As we move forward, the focus will drift upward again, away from corridors and seating, toward the open sky above the Colosseum. There, stretched across its rim, was another masterpiece of quiet engineering, one that controlled light, heat, and comfort with the same subtle authority. But for now, let the image rest, a crowd flowing like water through stone, unaware that it is being guided and perfectly content to be so. As the crowd settled into their places and the arena waited below, the Colosseum revealed one of its most delicate illusions. Above the stone, above the arches and tiers, the open Roman sky seemed close enough to touch, and yet, on certain days, that sky could be softened, shaped, and partially tamed, not by walls, not by roofs of stone, but by fabric, rope, and the quiet confidence of Roman engineering. The velarium was not a roof in the way we usually imagine one. It did not seal the arena away from the world. Instead, it hovered lightly, like a suggestion rather than a command. When unfurled, it cast a gentle shade across the seating, filtering the sun without blocking the air. Light still entered, wind still moved, sound still escaped upward. The Colosseum breathed beneath it. This immense awning was made of canvas, woven thick enough to block harsh sunlight but flexible enough to respond to changing weather. Its color was likely pale, reflecting heat rather than absorbing it, turning the glare of midday into something softer and more tolerable. Under its shade, stone seats grew cooler, and the long hours of spectacle became easier to endure. What makes the velarium remarkable is not merely its size, but its restraint. It did not cover the arena floor completely. The central space remained open to the sky, allowing sunlight to illuminate the sand below. This was intentional. The performances depended on visibility, on contrast between light and shadow. The velarium served the audience, not the spectacle. Supporting this floating canopy was a forest of wooden masts fitted into sockets along the top edge of the Colosseum. These poles leaned outward, counterbalanced by ropes anchored far beyond the building itself. The structure did not rely on brute force alone, but on balance, tension, and trust in materials behaving as expected. Managing this system required specialized knowledge. Sailors from the Roman navy are often believed to have handled the velarium, bringing their familiarity with ropes, knots, and wind to the task. This detail feels fitting. The Colosseum, after all, was a stone vessel, and the velarium its sail. Together, they transformed architecture into something almost nautical. Ropes stretched across the open air in careful patterns, creating a web that distributed weight evenly. Each section of fabric could be adjusted independently, allowing parts of the seating to be shaded or exposed as needed. The system responded to the day, to the sun's movement, to the shifting breeze. It was not static, but alive with small, constant corrections. From below, most spectators likely never saw the full complexity of this mechanism. They experienced only its effect, a sudden softening of light, a welcome coolness on the skin, a sense that the building was attentive to their comfort, even while hosting spectacles of overwhelming scale. The velarium also shaped sound. Fabric absorbs and diffuses noise, subtly altering how voices and cheers traveled through the space. Under its shade, the roar of the crowd may have felt fuller, less sharp, blending into a deep, continuous presence rather than piercing bursts. The building did not merely stage events, it curated sensation. There is something deeply Roman about this choice. Instead of dominating nature entirely, the engineers negotiated with it. They allowed air to flow, light to move, clouds to pass. The velarium did not conquer the sky, it collaborated with it. In doing so, it made the experience feel both grand and humane. And yet, like so many features of the Colosseum, the velarium was temporary. It could be unfurled and withdrawn, present one moment and gone the next. When storms threatened, the fabric was likely removed to prevent damage. The sky returned fully, unfiltered, reminding everyone that this architectural mastery had limits. This impermanence is important. The Colosseum is often imagined as eternal, unchanging stone, but in its prime, it was dynamic. Elements moved, adjusted, appeared, and disappeared. The building was less a monument and more a performance, with parts that shifted in response to time and circumstance. Imagine sitting there as the velarium opens above you. The sun dims slightly, the heat eases. A breeze moves across the canvas, creating ripples of light and shadow. For a moment, the vastness of the structure feels gentle, almost kind. You are not overwhelmed by stone or sky, but held between them. This balance between power and subtlety defines the Colosseum's hidden engineering. It was never about excess alone. It was about control so refined that it felt invisible. The velarium did not demand attention, it simply worked. As the day progressed and shadows lengthened, the canopy's presence may have faded from awareness entirely. The crowd focused on the arena, on the rhythms of the event. Above them, fabric and rope continued their quiet labor, responding to wind and sun with patient precision. In the end, the velarium reminds us that the Colosseum was not just a place to witness history, but a machine designed to care for its audience in subtle ways. Stone may endure, but comfort often depends on softer things. Soon, our attention will drift downward again, beneath the arena floor, where water, wood, and stone combine to create illusions even more surprising than a folding sky. For now, let the image linger, a vast crowd seated beneath a shade that moves like a cloud, unaware of the careful hands that keep it suspended and content to simply sit, watch, and breathe. By now, the Colosseum may seem like a structure that had already revealed all its secrets. Stone guided crowds, fabric softened the sky, corridors whispered directions without words. And yet, beneath all of this careful planning lay something even more surprising. The building could change its purpose, sometimes dramatically, without ever changing its shape. The Colosseum was not built to host a single kind of event. It was designed to adapt. In this way, it behaved less like a monument and more like a living organism, capable of shifting moods, roles, and rhythms depending on the day. One morning it might host gladiators, the afternoon wild animals, and on rare occasions something far stranger. Ancient accounts describe events where the arena floor was transformed to hold water, creating the illusion of a flooded space. While scholars continue to debate the exact scale of these spectacles, what matters for our story is the intention behind them. The Colosseum was imagined as a place where transformation itself was part of the show. Audiences were not meant to grow comfortable with predictability. Beneath the arena floor, wooden platforms could be assembled, removed, or reconfigured. Trapdoors were covered and uncovered. Mechanisms rested dormant until needed. The space was never fixed, it waited. This flexibility required extraordinary coordination. Materials had to be moved quietly, efficiently, often overnight. Workers knew the building intimately, understanding not only where each beam belonged, but how long it could remain there before being replaced by something else. Timing mattered as much as strength. The audience, meanwhile, saw none of this preparation. They arrived to find the arena already transformed, as though the building itself had decided to become something new. This illusion of effortlessness was no accident. Roman engineering prized results that appeared inevitable, even magical. There is something playful about this approach. The Colosseum teased its visitors, refusing to be fully known. Just when people thought they understood its limits, it offered a surprise. This sense of unpredictability kept the structure alive in the public imagination. It was not merely large, it was clever. At the same time, the building never lost its underlying order. No matter how the arena changed, the systems that supported it remained steady. Corridors still flowed, seating still held. The velarium still softened the sun. Change occurred within a framework of control. This balance between stability and flexibility is one of the Colosseum's greatest achievements. It allowed spectacle without chaos, surprise without collapse. The Romans did not seek novelty at the expense of safety. Instead, they engineered novelty itself. Imagine returning to the Colosseum multiple times over the years. Each visit offers something slightly different. The atmosphere shifts, the expectations adjust, and yet the building feels familiar. Reliable, always ready. This reliability made it possible for the Romans to push boundaries without fear. There is also a quieter lesson here. The Colosseum's adaptability reflects a Roman understanding of power. True strength was not rigidity, but the ability to respond. Stone that never moved would eventually fail. Systems that allowed adjustment endured. Even today, this idea feels modern. We admire structures that can change function, that can be repurposed rather than replaced. In this sense, the Colosseum was centuries ahead of its time, anticipating a philosophy of design that values longevity through flexibility. As the crowds came and went, few would have reflected on these ideas. They came to be entertained, to be impressed, yet the building itself carried a deeper message, one that did not shout. It suggested that permanence does not require stillness, and that order does not forbid play. As the sun lowered and shadows stretched across the stone, the arena returned to a quieter state. Mechanisms rested, platforms waited. The Colosseum paused, not as something finished, but as something prepared. In the next part of our journey, attention will shift from transformation to endurance. We will begin to explore how this adaptable machine survived centuries of use, neglect, and change long after its original purpose faded. For now, let the image settle. A building that could reinvent itself without losing its identity, content to rest until it was needed again. There comes a moment in every great story when the crowds drift away, the lights dim, and what remains is not action, but echo. For the Colosseum, that moment did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, almost politely, as centuries passed and the building began to listen more than perform. At first, the change was subtle. Events became less frequent. Repairs grew less urgent. The rhythms that once defined the arena softened. Stone that had known constant vibration from cheering feet now rested in longer stretches of stillness. The Colosseum did not collapse into silence, it eased into it. Rome itself was changing. Power shifted, tastes evolved. The spectacles that once defined public life no longer held the same meaning. And as attention moved elsewhere, the Colosseum remained, waiting without complaint. Its design, once tuned for crowds, proved equally capable of holding quiet. Without the roar of voices, new sounds emerged. Wind moved through arches more freely. Birds discovered ledges once shaken by applause. Rain tapped gently on stone that had endured far harsher impacts. The building became less of a stage and more of a shelter. What is remarkable is how gracefully the Colosseum accepted this transformation. It did not resist its new role. Corridors once filled with motion now guided light and shadow. Seating designed for bodies now cradled moss and grass. The arena floor, once carefully controlled, opened itself to weather and time. This was not decay in the dramatic sense, but adaptation. The same engineering that allowed flexibility during its active life now allowed survival during neglect. Stone expanded and contracted, arches redistributed weight, the structure adjusted slowly, patiently. People still came, though not as they once had. Pilgrims passed through, travelers paused in awe. Later, residents repurposed parts of the building, turning it into housing, workshops, even fortifications. The Colosseum became many things, none of them what it was originally built to be. And yet, it never truly lost itself. Even when stripped of decoration, even when partially dismantled, the logic of its design remained visible. You could still sense how it once worked, how crowds once moved, how spectacle once unfolded. The building remembered its past even when no one asked it to perform. There is a certain poetry in this. The Colosseum, which once mastered noise, learned to master silence. Its vast spaces, designed to amplify sound, now held quiet in careful balance. The same curves that once shaped cheers now shaped echoes. Standing there in later centuries, one might feel a strange calm. Without the urgency of events, the building invites reflection. It does not demand attention, it simply exists, offering perspective through scale and endurance. This quiet phase of the Colosseum's life is often overlooked, but it may be its most instructive. Here, the building teaches us that meaning does not vanish when function changes, it evolves. The Colosseum became a witness rather than a participant, observing history as it unfolded around it. Even damage became part of the story. Earthquakes shook the structure, breaking sections, shifting stones, yet the core endured. Arches compensated, weight found new paths downward. The engineering that once supported crowds now supported absence. Imagine walking through the Colosseum during this time. No banners, no announcements, just stone warmed by the sun and cooled by the evening air. Each step echoes softly, not as applause, but as acknowledgement. This is the Colosseum at rest, not defeated, but transformed. It stands as proof that structures built with care can outlive their original purposes and still remain relevant, even beautiful. As we move forward, the story will turn once more toward rediscovery, toward the moment when people began to look at the Colosseum not as a leftover of the past, but as something worth understanding, preserving, and listening to. For now, let the silence settle and allow the building its well earned pause. Silence, once settled, rarely lasts forever. Long after the Colosseum had learned to rest, it began slowly and almost shyly to be noticed again, not as a place of spectacle, not as a quarry or shelter, but as a question. People stood before it and wondered not what happened here, but how it worked. This shift did not come from excitement, but from curiosity. Scholars, architects, and travelers approached the Colosseum with a different kind of attention. They traced lines with their eyes, counted arches, followed the rhythm of stone repeating itself with quiet precision. What once seemed like ruin began to reveal intention. The building, stripped of its distractions, made its engineering more visible. Without crowds, without fabric shading the seats, without performances to command the senses, the structure itself became the main event. Each curve, each opening, each layered level offered clues to a mind that had planned not just for strength, but for experience. Early observers may not have had modern tools, but they had patience. They walked the corridors, noticed how light fell, how sound behaved, how movement felt natural even in emptiness. Slowly, they realized that the Colosseum was not only impressive because it was large, but because it was coherent. Everything belonged. As centuries passed, this curiosity deepened. Drawings were made, measurements recorded, comparisons drawn between ancient methods and contemporary practice. The Colosseum became a teacher, offering lessons without words. It showed how repetition could create stability, how modular design allowed for both scale and flexibility, how beauty could emerge from function. This rediscovery changed how people saw ancient engineering. The Colosseum was no longer viewed as a relic of brute force, but as evidence of sophisticated planning. It challenged the assumption that modern complexity was entirely new. Here was proof that careful thinking, executed patiently, could endure far beyond its makers. Even damage became instructive. Broken sections revealed inner layers. Missing stones exposed how weight was distributed, how materials worked together. Where the building had been wounded, it spoke more clearly. The absence of stone revealed the presence of logic. Visitors began to imagine the Colosseum not only as it was, but as it had been. They reconstructed it mentally, filling in gaps with understanding rather than spectacle. This act of imagination was quieter, slower, and perhaps more respectful. There is something deeply calming about this process. To stand before an ancient structure and realize that it still has something to teach invites a particular kind of humility. The Colosseum does not rush this lesson. It allows understanding to arrive gradually, like dusk settling over Rome. In this way, the building bridges time. It connects modern minds with ancient ones, not through drama, but through shared problem solving. Questions asked long ago are answered, again softly by stone. As night falls and the Colosseum glows gently under the city's lights, it becomes both monument and memory. It no longer needs to impress. It simply exists, confident that those who are willing to listen will hear its story. Next, the journey will reach its quiet conclusion. We will step back and consider what the Colosseum ultimately represents, not as a place, but as an idea. For now, let the image linger, stone speaking across centuries, and a listener finally ready to hear. When a building stands long enough, silence invites stories. The Colosseum, having survived emperors, earthquakes, and centuries of quiet, became fertile ground for imagination. Where knowledge faded, myth gently took its place, filling the gaps with whispers that sounded convincing simply because they had time on their side. Some stories painted the Colosseum as a place of endless cruelty, where violence flowed without restraint, day after day, year after year. Others imagined hidden mechanisms as mystical contraptions, almost magical in their complexity, far beyond human understanding. There were even tales that framed the building as cursed, its stones forever stained by suffering. These stories lingered not because they were accurate, but because they were dramatic. Yet the truth, when approached calmly, is often quieter and more complex. The Colosseum was not designed as a chamber of chaos. It was an ordered system, where even the most intense spectacles followed strict rules and careful planning. Events were scheduled, spaces managed, risks calculated. The building did not encourage disorder, it contained it. Myths thrive on extremes. They prefer absolutes while history lives in balance. The Colosseum was neither purely a symbol of brutality nor a flawless marvel. It was a reflection of its society, holding both its ingenuity and its contradictions within the same stone walls. Some misunderstandings stem from the building's sheer scale. When something is large and ancient, it is tempting to assume that its creators relied on mysterious knowledge now lost. In reality, much of the Colosseum's engineering is grounded in principles still understood today: balance, repetition, distribution of weight, and thoughtful use of materials. There is no need for magic when patience and skill suffice. Other myths grew from later reinterpretations. As values changed, people projected modern judgments onto ancient practices, simplifying complex cultural contexts into neat moral lessons. While reflection is important, oversimplification can blur understanding. The Colosseum becomes easier to condemn or romanticize than to truly comprehend. Interestingly, Many myths ignore the most remarkable aspect of the structure, its restraint. The building's design repeatedly favors control over excess, predictability over chaos. Even its hidden mechanisms, often described as terrifying or monstrous, were carefully regulated tools, operated by trained workers following precise routines. As historians revisited the Colosseum with fresh eyes, many of these myths began to soften, not disappear entirely, but lose their urgency. The building did not need exaggeration to be fascinating. Its reality, once understood, was compelling enough. There is a certain peace in letting go of myth. When we release the need for spectacle, we allow space for appreciation. The Colosseum becomes less of a symbol to argue over and more of a structure to observe quietly, thoughtfully. Standing inside the arena today, one can sense this shift. The air feels heavy not with drama but with time. Stone does not shout its past, it waits for those willing to listen beyond the stories they already know. As we approach the end of our journey, the Colosseum stands before us not as a riddle to be solved, but as a presence to be acknowledged. Its myths have faded into background noise, leaving behind something steadier and more enduring. In the final moments, we will step back even further, allowing the building to settle into its place within the broader rhythm of history. For now, let the myths drift away like distant echoes and rest in the calm that remains. When all the stories have been told and even the myths begin to fade, what remains is not noise but presence. The Colosseum, standing quietly in the heart of Rome, no longer asks to be understood in full. It simply asks to be noticed gently as one notices a familiar landscape at dusk. There are no instructions here, no performances waiting to begin. The stone rests in its own rhythm, warmed by the day and slowly releasing that warmth as evening settles in. Shadows stretch across arches that once framed movement and sound, now framing only air and light. The building breathes if one is willing to imagine it does. Time has softened the edges. What was once precise now carries a kind of tenderness. The curves remain confident, but they no longer demand attention. They offer it instead quietly, without urgency. Visitors pass through at a slower pace, their footsteps lighter, as if instinctively respecting the calm that has settled here. This calm is not emptiness, it is fullness of a different kind. The Colosseum holds layers of experience, compressed gently into stone. Crowds, silence, curiosity, misunderstanding, rediscovery, all coexist without conflict. The building does not choose which version of itself to be, it allows them all. Perhaps this is its final lesson. Not about engineering or power or spectacle, but about endurance without insistence. The Colosseum has nothing left to prove. It stands because it was built with care and because it learned over time to let go of what it no longer needed. As night deepens, the city around it grows quieter. Lights soften, sounds retreat. The Colosseum remains outlined against the dark sky, neither dominating nor disappearing, just present. If you imagine yourself there now, standing still, there is no need to think, to analyze, or to remember. The building does not require attention, it welcomes rest, the kind that comes when effort is no longer necessary. And so, as the stone settles into shadow, let your thoughts do the same. Let the arches hold the day behind them. Let the echoes drift away. There is nothing more to uncover, nothing more to explain. Only the quiet remains.